I always believed that home should be a sanctuary. That belief guided me through 2 years of searching before I found the perfect property in Oak Ridge Estates. The modest house sat on nearly an acre of land, bordered by conservation woods with plenty of space for what would become my passion, a native plant garden that would transform the typical suburban lawn into a sustainable ecosystem. I saved for years to afford this dream, and when I finally moved in, I committed myself to creating something special. My neighbors initially watched with curiosity as I removed the traditional sod and began planting native species. "You know the HOA has strict rules about lawns," one neighbor warned me. I assured him that I had studied the bylaws carefully and confirmed that nothing prohibited environmentally friendly landscaping focused on local flora. In fact, I discovered the county offered incentives for water conservation gardens, which I proudly displayed on a small plaque near my garden entrance. Within a year, my once ordinary yard had transformed into a stunning display of seasonal blooms, winding stone pathways, and carefully arranged rock gardens. Colorful butterflies danced among the coneflowers and black-eyed Susans in summer. Goldfinches feasted on seed heads in fall. The garden became not just my pride but a neighborhood attraction. Even reluctant neighbors began asking for plant recommendations and gardening advice. "Your garden single-handedly raised property values on this street," my neighbor Tom told me one evening as I was deadheading spent blooms. His words validated the countless hours of research, planning, and physical labor I had invested in this space. The garden had become more than plants and soil. It was an extension of myself, a living canvas that evolved with each season. What few people knew about was my other passion. Behind my detached garage, in a specialized building constructed to exceed all county regulations, I operated a small skunk rehabilitation facility. I had volunteered with wildlife rescue organizations for years before getting my rehabilitation license. Most of my work involved orphaned or injured skunks that needed care before being released back into the wild, though I also maintained a small breeding program for a threatened subspecies under a special state conservation permit. I kept the operation discreet, not out of shame, but because most people misunderstand these gentle creatures. My facility was immaculate, odor-controlled, and regularly inspected. The animals had spacious, enriched enclosures, and I maintained detailed records of their care and progress. The skunks were my peaceful companions, each with distinct personalities that made my work rewarding. Everything changed the day Karen Whitfield became president of our HOA board. Her white colonial home with its precisely trimmed boxwood stood in stark contrast to my naturalistic approach. From our first interaction at the annual community picnic, her disdain was evident. "Quite an unusual garden you have," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It looks rather wild." The way she emphasized the last word made it clear this was not a compliment. I should have recognized this as the warning it was. Instead, I explained the ecological benefits of native plants, their role in supporting pollinators, and how they required less water and maintenance than traditional lawns. Her eyes glazed over within seconds, and she excused herself to greet new arrivals with considerably more enthusiasm. I returned home from work early one Friday afternoon looking forward to garden time when I heard it: laughter, splashing, and the distinctive pop of champagne corks. Following the sounds, I rushed through my side gate to discover my garden had been invaded. 12 women in plush robes lounged in portable hot tubs that had somehow been placed directly atop my carefully planned beds. Massage tables stood beneath my Japanese maple trees. A catering table loaded with mimosas and hors d'oeuvres blocked the central pathway. At the center of it all stood Karen, directing a photographer to capture her posed against my flowering shrubs. "What is happening here?" I demanded, my voice barely controlled. Karen turned to me with that practiced smile. "Oh, hello. We are having our Ladies' Spring Spa fundraiser. Your garden made such a perfect backdrop." "You do not have permission to be here," I stated firmly. "This is private property. You need to leave immediately." Karen gave a dismissive wave. "Do not be difficult. This is for charity. Besides, these community beautification areas are for everyone to enjoy. We will be done by sunset." She turned back to her photographer as if I were merely an interruption, not the homeowner whose privacy and property had been violated. In that moment, I realized this was not a misunderstanding. It was an intentional invasion, and my garden had become a battlefield I had never asked for. The aftermath of Karen's spa party revealed the full extent of the damage. I walked through my garden the following morning, a knot forming in my stomach with each new discovery. Crushed perennials lay flat where hot tubs had been placed directly on garden beds. Empty champagne bottles were half buried in mulch. Someone had used a delicate Japanese maple as a towel rack, snapping several branches under the weight. Most disturbing was a copper bird bath that had been moved from its foundation and now lay cracked beside the herb garden. I documented everything methodically, taking photographs from multiple angles and noting the estimated cost of each damaged plant. My hands trembled slightly as I recorded video of muddy footprints through planting beds where rare native orchids were just beginning to emerge. The destruction represented not just financial loss, but years of careful cultivation and patience. "Karen," I said firmly when I called her later that morning, "we need to discuss what happened in my garden yesterday and the damage that was caused." "Damage?" She sounded genuinely confused. "We cleaned up everything before we left. All trash was removed." I took a deep breath. There are trampled plants, broken branches, moved fixtures. Someone broke my bird bath. These are not minor issues. A long pause followed. Those things were probably already damaged. My guests are not careless people. They are the wives of doctors and executives. Her tone shifted from defensive to condescending. "Perhaps your garden is simply not as sturdy as a proper landscape would be. Those wild plants you choose are not really meant for residential areas." I explained that I expected compensation for the damages and assurance this would never happen again. Her response was immediate. "I do not think the HOA budget should cover your gardening choices. And regarding future events, the community beautification easement allows us reasonable use of enhancement areas." "What easement?" I asked, completely baffled. "There is no easement on my property." "You should check your paperwork," Karen replied before ending the call. I spent that afternoon combing through my closing documents, deed, and property survey. No easement existed. The property line was clearly defined, and my garden was entirely within it. Confused, I reached out to several neighbors who had lived in the community longer than I had. "That sounds like something Karen would make up," Tom confided when I asked him about a possible easement. "She did something similar to the Johnsons last year, claiming their driveway extension violated setback rules that did not actually exist." Armed with my documentation, I attended the next HOA board meeting. The community room at our local library felt intimately small as I presented my case to the 5 board members. Karen sat at the center, her expression neutral as I showed photos of the damage and explained the unauthorized use of my property. "I have all my property documents here," I concluded, "showing there is no easement or community access agreement for my garden." Karen smiled thinly. "The board needs to review the older community planning documents. The original developer designated certain areas for community enhancement. These may not appear in individual deeds but are part of the master development plan. Another board member, an older gentleman named Robert, frowned. I do not recall any such designations in the original plans. They were updated several years ago, Karen replied smoothly. I have copies in the official records. We can review them at our next executive session. I left the meeting with vague assurances that the board would look into the matter, but no concrete resolution. The following week, I received an email with attached documents allegedly showing my property contained a 5-foot community beautification easement along the entire perimeter. The document looked official, but something about it did not feel right. I took the papers to the county recorder's office, where a helpful clerk compared them with the official records. These have been altered, she confirmed after careful examination. The original development plans show no such easement on your lot. Someone added this section recently. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of Karen's deception. Through my window, I could see the soft lighting illuminating my damaged garden. Beyond it, the specialized building housing my skunk rehabilitation facility was barely visible in the darkness. The gentle rustling of the animals settling for the night carried faintly on the breeze. As I looked from the falsified documents to my garden, and then to the skunk enclosure, an idea began to form. Karen had shown she was willing to lie, trespass, and destroy to get her way. Fighting her with conventional means seemed increasingly futile, but perhaps there were other ways to protect what was mine. Ways that remained perfectly within the bounds of law and regulation, even if they might come with certain natural consequences. The regional HOA Oversight Committee met quarterly in a conference room at the community college. I arrived 30 minutes early, my evidence neatly organized in a 3-ring binder. Each section was color-coded and tabbed: property documents, photographs of damage, correspondence with Karen, and most importantly, the proof of document falsification from the county recorder's office. We understand your frustration, but we need to maintain community harmony, the committee chair said after I presented my case. Karen sat across the table, her expression concerned and reasonable. We will launch an investigation into the document discrepancies you have raised and reassess the situation regarding your property boundaries. For a moment, hope flickered. The committee members asked detailed questions and took notes. One woman seemed particularly troubled by the altered documents, requesting copies for further examination. As the meeting adjourned, the chair assured me they would contact me within 2 weeks with their findings. I allowed myself cautious optimism as I drove home. The system might work after all. Perhaps Karen had finally overreached. My relief was short-lived. 3 days later, I found the first flyer tucked under my windshield wiper. Bold red letters declared, "Wildlife Hazard Alert." Beneath was a stock photo of a rabid animal foaming at the mouth. The text warned neighbors about unpermitted wildlife being kept in residential areas and the disease risks they posed. No direct accusation pointed to me, but the implications were clear. Similar flyers appeared on community bulletin boards throughout the neighborhood. Then came the whispers. Parents pulled their children closer when walking past my house. Dog walkers crossed to the other side of the street. I received anonymous emails expressing concern for community safety and questioning whether my exotic pets were properly contained. The isolation stung, but I knew my rehabilitation work was fully licensed and above reproach. I maintained meticulous records, followed strict protocols, and regularly passed surprise inspections. When the county health inspector arrived one Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, I welcomed him confidently. "Just a routine check based on community concerns," he explained, not meeting my eyes. I recognized him from previous visits and noted his discomfort. Someone had pressured him into this inspection. "Please come in," I said. "Everything is exactly as it was during your inspection 3 months ago, but I am happy to show you around again." For 2 hours, he examined every aspect of my facility: ventilation systems, waste management protocols, feeding records, and health documentation for each animal. He inspected the secure fencing, double entry safety doors, and specialized enclosures designed to exceed wildlife rehabilitation standards. "Everything appears to be in compliance," he finally concluded, making notes on his inspection form. "Your permits are current, and the facility meets all requirements for wildlife rehabilitation." "Thank you," I said. "I take these responsibilities very seriously." He hesitated before leaving. "Off the record, you should know there have been numerous complaints. I do not see any violations, but the pressure to find something is significant." I nodded my understanding. "I appreciate your professionalism." The health department issued its report clearing my facility of any violations, but the victory felt hollow. The following week, I received an official letter from the HOA with new wildlife nuisance guidelines hastily added to the community bylaws. While not explicitly prohibiting licensed rehabilitation activities, the new rules imposed additional community notification requirements and aesthetic standards, clearly designed to make my work more difficult. The letter also stated that the investigation into the property boundary dispute was ongoing, with no timeline for resolution. My appeal had failed, neutralized by Karen's behind-the-scenes maneuvering and willingness to spread misinformation. That evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the pile of notifications and community complaint forms spread before me. Through my window, I could see Karen hosting yet another gathering in her immaculate backyard. Her laughter carried across the evening air, the sound tinged with triumph. In the distance, the distinct silhouette of my skunk enclosure stood as a reminder of my commitment to these misunderstood creatures. Something shifted inside me. If Karen wanted to play by her own rules, perhaps it was time to change the game entirely. Spring arrived with an explosion of color in my recovering garden. The damaged areas were slowly healing, new growth emerging from trampled soil. I had replaced what could not be saved and reinforced the garden's boundaries with decorative stone edging that doubled as a clear property marker. The work had been therapeutic, a way to reclaim my space and center myself amid the ongoing conflict. The glossy brochure arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. Annual Oak Ridge Estates Garden Tour and Fundraiser proclaimed the elegant font across the top. I nearly dropped it when I saw the cover image. My garden in full bloom, photographed without my knowledge or permission. Inside, my property was listed as the showcase destination for the upcoming weekend tour, complete with a detailed description of my award-winning native plant sanctuary. I immediately drafted a formal cease and desist letter, hand-delivering copies to Karen's home and the HOA office. The response came within hours, a brief email from the HOA secretary. "Thank you for your concerns. The tour schedule has been modified to respect your privacy preferences." Relief washed over me, but something about the easy capitulation felt wrong. Karen had never yielded so quickly before. My suspicion prompted me to check social media groups for our community. There, in the neighborhood events page, were multiple posts promoting ticket sales for the garden tour. "Limited tickets still available. Do not miss exclusive access to the native plant sanctuary on Maple Drive." Several comments mentioned looking forward to seeing that beautiful wild garden everyone talks about. The tickets had been sold weeks ago. The brochures were already printed. Despite the reassurance that the tour schedule had been modified, all evidence suggested my garden remained the main attraction. I installed additional security cameras along my property line and posted clearer, "No trespassing" signs. Hopping these visible deterrents might prevent another invasion. Saturday morning arrived with perfect spring weather, ideal for a garden tour. I remained vigilant, working in my front yard to monitor any unusual activity. At precisely 2:00 p.m., I heard the sound that confirmed my worst fears, the distinctive metal click of my back garden gate being unlatched. I hurried around the side of the house to find Karen leading a group of about 20 people into my garden. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and carried a portable microphone, already in the middle of what sounded like a rehearsed presentation. And as you can see, our community beautification initiative has transformed this once-ordinary space into a pollinator haven, she was saying, gesturing broadly at my years of work as if it were a community project. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "This tour does not have permission to be in my garden. This is private property." Karen turned, her smile never faltering. "Oh, hello. We are just passing through as part of our community garden appreciation event. We will only be a few minutes." "No," I stated firmly. "I specifically denied permission for this tour. Everyone needs to leave immediately." Murmurs rippled through the group as Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do not make a scene. These people paid good money, and the proceeds benefit the community." "That does not give you the right to trespass," I replied, loud enough for others to hear. "The tour was explicitly informed not to include my property." A few tour participants began to look uncomfortable, edging toward the gate. Karen's smile tightened as she realized she was losing control of the situation. "Let us just finish the scheduled presentation," she insisted. "It will only take 15 minutes. "No," I repeated, "please leave now." Karen's expression hardened, but she maintained her public persona. "Let me show you something before we go," she announced to the group, striding purposefully toward a section of my garden where I cultivated rare native plants. To my horror, she reached for a delicate prairie-fringed orchid, a threatened species I had spent 3 years carefully propagating. "These interesting specimens demonstrate the versatility of native plants," she said, grasping the stem. "Do not touch that." I moved quickly toward her, but not before she pulled on the plant, intending to display it to the group. The rare orchid snapped in her hand. "It is just a plant," Karen said dismissively as she realized what had happened, tossing the broken stem aside. "There are plenty more." Time seemed to slow as I stared at the broken orchid. That single plant represented countless hours of research, specialized care, and patient cultivation. Its monetary value exceeded several $100s, but its significance to me was immeasurable. "That was a state-listed threatened species," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. "It took years to establish. You have just destroyed a protected plant." An uncomfortable silence fell over the tour group. Several people edged further toward the exit, clearly wanting no part in this confrontation. Karen quickly moved to salvage the situation, guiding the group toward another section of the garden. "We have plenty more to see," she announced brightly. "Let us continue to the water conservation area." "The tour is over," I stated, moving to block her path. "Everyone needs to leave my property now, or I will call the police and report this as criminal trespass and destruction of protected species." The mention of police involvement proved decisive. Tour members began filing out through the gate, some offering apologetic glances as they departed. Karen remained, her composure slipping as her audience disappeared. "You are being completely unreasonable," she hissed once we were alone. "This tour benefits the entire community. Your unauthorized entry and destruction of my property benefits no one," I replied. "This is the second time you have invaded my garden without permission. There will not be a third." Karen gathered her things, her movements sharp with anger. "The HOA board will hear about this obstructionism. You seem to forget that we determine what is acceptable in this community." As she stormed toward the gate, she paused for a final parting shot. "And you might want to reconsider your attitude. I hear the county is revisiting their policies on wildlife rehabilitation in residential areas. It would be a shame if your little hobby came under additional scrutiny." I watched her leave, the broken orchid still lying on the ground where she had carelessly discarded it. In that moment, something crystallized within me. Karen had now threatened both of my passions, my garden and my rehabilitation work. She had destroyed something rare and precious out of negligence and entitlement. As I carefully gathered the broken orchid, considering whether any part could be salvaged, I knew the time for conventional responses had passed. Karen had declared war on everything I valued. It was time to deploy a strategy that would end this conflict decisively and permanently. The morning after the garden tour incident, I called Dr. Amanda Lewis, a wildlife biologist who specialized in mesopredator behavior and had helped me set up my rehabilitation facility. We had worked together for years, and I trusted her expertise implicitly. "I need advice on a delicate situation," I explained after we exchanged greetings. I detailed the ongoing issues with Karen and the HOA, including the threats to my rehabilitation work. "I am concerned about potential new restrictions that could impact the animals in my care." "Your permits are in order and your facility exceeds requirements," Amanda reassured me. "They cannot arbitrarily shut you down without cause. But they can make things difficult enough that continuing becomes impractical," I pointed out. "I need to understand all my rights and options." We spoke for nearly an hour about wildlife regulations, property rights, and the specific parameters of my rehabilitation license. Amanda confirmed what I had suspected. My operation was not only legal but exemplary in following best practices. She promised to send me additional documentation outlining the protection afforded to licensed wildlife rehabilitators under state law. Our conversation eventually turned to skunk behavior. "They are generally peaceful creatures," Amanda noted. "They spray only when they feel threatened, and they give plenty of warning signals first." "What sort of things might they perceive as threatening?" I asked, an idea forming. "Sudden movements, loud noises, feeling cornered," she listed. "They are actually quite predictable in their defensive responses. That is why we train rehabbers to move slowly and speak softly around them." After our call, I spent the afternoon researching legal precedents involving wildlife rehabilitation facilities and property rights. I printed relevant statutes and court decisions, highlighting passages that strengthened my position. Knowledge would be my foundation, but I needed more than legal arguments to deal with Karen. The next morning, I visited the county permit office to verify my documentation was current and to request additional copies of my rehabilitation license and facility certifications. The clerk seemed surprised by my thoroughness. "Planning for something specific?" she asked as she stamped the duplicate certificates. "Just ensuring all my paperwork is in order," I replied casually. "Sometimes neighbors have questions about the rehabilitation work." Back home, I walked my property line, surveying the garden with new eyes. Karen had shown a pattern of unauthorized entry through the same gate, always setting up her events in the central garden area, where the stone patio created a natural gathering space. If history repeated itself, I could predict exactly where any future intrusion would occur. I called a contractor who specialized in wildlife enclosures. I need to create a modified exercise area for the rehabilitation program, I explained when he arrived for the consultation. Something that would allow monitored access to a portion of the garden under specific conditions. He studied my property and existing facility with professional interest. You are already exceeding standards with your current setup. What specific modifications did you have in mind? I showed him detailed drawings I had prepared, featuring a secure corridor system that would connect the existing skunk enclosure to a gated section of the garden. The design included one-way access points that could be opened or closed from the main facility. "This is extremely well thought out," he commented, reviewing my plans. The animals would have controlled access to an enriched natural environment, which is actually recommended for rehabilitation success, and you could secure it completely when not in supervised use. "Exactly," I confirmed. "I want to enhance their pre-release training while maintaining security." The modifications took 3 days to complete. When finished, they were hardly noticeable. Discrete openings camouflaged by strategic plantings, the corridor disguised as a decorative garden border. Everything was built to exceed wildlife rehabilitation standards and fully complied with my permits. Next, I turned my attention to the garden itself. I researched plants and foods that skunks found particularly attractive, making a careful list of skunk favorites. Over the following week, I added these plants strategically throughout the garden, concentrating them around the stone patio area. I installed specialized low-voltage lighting along the garden paths, designed to provide illumination comfortable for nocturnal creatures. Each installation was documented with photographs and timestamps, creating a clear record of my garden modifications being part of a legitimate rehabilitation enrichment program. Every step I took was methodical, legal, and thoroughly documented. I even updated my rehabilitation logs to reflect the enhanced enrichment program I was implementing. If questioned later, every modification would have a clear, legitimate purpose related to my licensed wildlife work. As I finalized my preparations, I noticed a new post in the community's online bulletin board. Karen had announced an exclusive ladies' spring wellness retreat scheduled for the following Saturday. The event description mentioned our serene garden setting and promised an unforgettable spa experience. No specific location was listed, but the accompanying photo showed a corner of my garden, partially cropped but unmistakable. I circled the date on my calendar, a sense of calm purpose replacing the anger I had carried for months. Karen was planning a third invasion, unaware that this time my garden would be ready for her, not with locks or barriers or confrontation, but with a natural defense system that was perfectly legal, completely ethical, and potentially very effective. Friday evening, I performed a final check of my property. The rehabilitation enclosure modifications were functioning perfectly, allowing controlled access to the garden through the specialized corridor. Fresh, no trespassing signs were clearly posted at all entry points. 4 discrete security cameras provided complete coverage of the garden, their footage backing up to both local storage and a cloud service. I carefully documented the condition of my garden, photographing each section in detail to establish a before record. The skunk attractive plantings had established well over the past 2 weeks, creating natural interest zones around the central patio area. To the casual observer, these appeared to be ordinary garden plants, evening primrose, Solomon seal, and other native species, their specific appeal to skunks known only to wildlife specialists. That night, I followed the regular rehabilitation feeding schedule, ensuring all animals were comfortably settled. The 5 skunks currently in my care, 3 nearly ready for release, and 2 permanent residents with injuries that prevented returning to the wild, had become accustomed to the expanded enrichment area during supervised daytime sessions. Before sunrise Saturday morning, I gathered my camping gear and loaded my car. I had planned a day trip to a state park 40 miles away, where I would hike and photograph spring wildflowers. This excursion had been scheduled weeks ago and mentioned to several neighbors, establishing a clear pattern that I would be away from home all day. Heading out for the day, my neighbor Tom called as I loaded the last of my gear. "Yes, going to Ridgewood State Park," I replied. "They have a wildflower walk I have been wanting to do." "Have fun," he said. "I will keep an eye on your place." I smiled and waved. "Thanks, I should be back by evening." At the park, I checked in at the visitor center, collecting a trail map and program schedule that would later serve as evidence of my whereabouts. I hiked several marked trails, taking photographs of spring ephemerals and stopping for lunch at a scenic overlook. Throughout the day, I made small purchases at the park store and cafe, creating a trail of time-stamped receipts that clearly placed me miles away from home. At regular intervals, I discreetly checked my phone, where a secure app connected to my home security system allowed me to monitor activity on my property. For most of the morning, all remained quiet. Then, shortly after noon, movement triggered the driveway camera. Karen's luxury SUV pulled up beside my house. She emerged wearing a floral sundress and carrying a clipboard, looking around cautiously before opening the garden gate and entering my backyard. Within minutes, a catering van arrived, followed by 2 cars carrying portable spa equipment. Workers began unloading massage tables, portable hot tubs, and decorative elements, all directed by Karen despite the prominent "No trespassing" signs they passed. I watched the security feed as they set up directly on the central patio area, exactly where I had predicted. Karen pointed to various locations, instructing workers to place refreshment tables and seating arrangements. Several times she checked her watch and scanned the area, clearly concerned about being discovered before her guests arrived. By 1 o'clock, the transformation was complete. My garden had been converted into an elaborate spa retreat setting. Flowers that did not belong to my garden adorned tables covered in white linen. A mimosa bar gleamed in the sunlight. Massage tables topped with plush towels stood beneath shade canopies. The portable hot tubs bubbled invitingly, placed directly beside the skunk-attractive plantings I had so carefully established. Guests began arriving shortly after, each greeted effusively by Karen. Wine glasses were filled, robes distributed, and spa treatments commenced. The women lounged in the garden, completely unaware they were trespassing on private property or that their movements were being captured by security cameras. From my distant hiking trail, I continued monitoring the situation. The rehabilitation corridor remained secured for the moment. I had made no special arrangements for the skunks to enter the garden. They would simply have the same controlled access they had been granted during their normal enrichment periods. Whether they chose to investigate the unusual activity would be entirely their decision. Around 3 o'clock, as the spa party reached its peak, I observed the first skunk emerge from the corridor. The sleek black and white creature paused at the garden's edge, naturally cautious but curious about the unfamiliar sounds and scents. After a moment's hesitation, it began moving slowly through the garden underbrush, drawn to the planted attractants now enhanced by food aromas from the party. The skunk approached the refreshment table, remaining hidden in the ornamental grasses beside it. For several minutes, it simply observed, unnoticed by the party guests. Then a second skunk appeared, following the same path toward the central patio. Soon a third joined them, the small group naturally converging on the area with the most interesting scents and activity. The first scream came when a guest reaching for a strawberry found herself face to face with a curious skunk investigating the food table. Her sudden movement and loud cry triggered the skunk's defensive instinct. The distinctive spray discharged precisely as nature intended, an effective deterrent to a perceived threat. The chain reaction that followed was both predictable and spectacular. Panicked guests scrambled away from the first spray, their sudden movements alarming the other skunks, which responded in kind. Within moments, the carefully orchestrated spa retreat dissolved into chaos. Women fled in all directions, abandoning personal belongings in their haste to escape the overwhelming odor. Karen stood frozen in disbelief, directly in the path of a startled skunk. The look of horror on her face as she realized what was happening was captured perfectly by my security camera. The spray caught her full force, saturating her designer dress and carefully styled hair with the unmistakable essence of threatened skunk. From my peaceful mountain trail, I watched the exodus unfold on my phone screen. The garden emptied in record time, abandoned spa equipment and personal items scattered like debris after a storm. Karen was the last to leave, her furious expression visible even on the small screen as she pointed at my security camera before stumbling through the gate. I tucked my phone away and continued my hike, secure in the knowledge that every moment had been documented. The skunks would return to their enclosure naturally once the disturbance ended. My property would be quiet again by the time I returned home. And Karen had finally experienced the natural consequence of her repeated trespassing, a consequence that smelled remarkably like justice. I arrived home shortly after sunset, parking in my driveway with deliberate casualness. The neighborhood appeared peaceful, though I noticed several windows with faces peering out as I unloaded my camping gear. News had clearly spread about the incident in my garden. "There was quite a commotion at your place today," Tom called from his porch. "Something about skunks at some party. The whole street could hear the screaming." "Skunks," I replied with carefully constructed surprise. "I have been at Ridgewood all day. What happened?" Tom filled me in on the neighborhood gossip, how Karen's exclusive spa event had ended in disaster when wildlife from the adjacent woods had apparently wandered into the gathering. "Never seen people clear out so fast," he chuckled. "Some of them drove home wrapped in towels, afraid to get back in their clothes." I expressed appropriate concern and headed inside to review my security footage. The cameras had captured everything in perfect detail: the unauthorized entry, the elaborate setup, the natural appearance of the skunks, and the chaotic departure. I downloaded and backed up the files, then checked on the rehabilitation facility. All 5 skunks had returned to their enclosure and seemed calm, following their normal evening routines. I documented their condition and behavior in the rehabilitation logs, noting that they had experienced an unplanned enrichment interaction due to unauthorized human presence in their training area. The confrontation came the following morning. I was assessing the damage to my garden when Karen appeared at my gate, leading a group of neighbors. Despite evident attempts to clean up, the distinctive skunk odor still clung to her. Her eyes were red with either rage or the lingering effects of the spray. "You did this deliberately," she accused, her voice shrill. "You trained those animals to attack my event." "I do not understand," I replied calmly. "I was hiking at Ridgewood State Park yesterday. I have receipts, photos and witnesses placing me 40 miles away all day. I invited the group into my garden, where abandoned spa items still littered the ground. It appears someone used my property without permission while I was away, I observed. Again. Karen's face contorted with fury.